Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. Today we will review Python's basic data types, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. We are ready for Lesson 4, and I have Visual Studio Code open. You can see I have a folder to the left that is named Lesson 4, and that's what you'll find in the course resources. Now let's create a new file in this folder. I'll click the little plus icon up here for a new file. And this is a good time to talk about naming conventions for files with Python. We use all lowercase, so I'm going to type data, and then if we need a space, we do not use dashes or hyphens, if you will. We use underscores, and then we continue to type in lowercase. So I'm naming the file data_types.py, and then press enter, and there is the file that we'll work with. Now that we have the file, you'll see the play button up here that we'll use to run our code and the associated menu that can show with that. So let's begin by typing inside the file, and I'm going to just put a comment here that says string data type. It's the first data type that we're going to cover, and I'm going to talk about the literal assignment of values. So I'll type literal assignment here in another comment, and I'm going to type a variable named first, and I'm going to assign the string Dave. This is literal assignment, so I literally assigned this value, Dave, that is a string value, to the variable first. Now I'm also going to create a variable named last, and I'll put my last name in there. These are both string values. Now we can check this in Python if we use the print statement, and then we'll use the type function, and I'll pass in first. So that is the variable first that holds the string value Dave, and we'll see that when we check it. So I'm going to press Control S to save the file. You could also do that from the File menu and then find Save here. You can see it's Control S. After that, I'll come up here to the little menu by our play button and choose Run Python File. Now it went ahead and opened the terminal window for me when I did that, and you can see the output says class string. This str stands for string. Okay, after that, I can close the terminal and it will reopen it when we run the file again. There's another way that we can check for this value. So I'll once again type print, then I'm going to say type, pass in first. Let's see if it is equal to, and that is to equal, and then str for string. And besides that, let's do one other one that we can also check. Now I'm going to do Shift Alt and the down arrow that will just copy this down, and then I'm going to change what's inside of the print. There is an isInstance function that we can use, and with this I'll pass in the variable first, and then we're going to say it is an instance of what, and in this case we're checking for string. So now we'll see the output of all three of these print statements. Once again, Control S to save, and then I'll just click the play button to run the code, and I'll need to pull this up maybe to see all of the output, and I'll scroll just a little bit. There we go. So we see string that we previously had here, and then true, true. So the output of the following two statements is type first equal to string, and the output is true. And then is the first variable an instance of string with this isInstance function, and that is also true. Okay, now that we have looked at literal assignment, let's look at another way we can assign a value, and that's with a constructor function. So I'll make a comment for that. Now I'm going to define pizza, and this variable is going to hold a string that says pepperoni, but I'm going to use the string constructor function. So it's str and then parentheses, and inside of this I'm going to pass in the string pepperoni. Now after this, I'll copy all three of these, and I will paste below. So I copied with Control C after I highlighted this, and I paste with Control V, the letter V as in Victoria. Okay, then I need to change this word first to pizza. So I highlight the first one, and then Control D to select the second and the third instance of first. Now I can just start typing pizza, and it will change all three. So now we're going to check the output for pizza as well. And I can highlight these also and press Control and the slash, and it will comment these out. So we only see the output for our pizza now after I save once again with Control S. Now clicking the play button, And we should get some output that we once again see in the terminal. And I'm going to just leave that terminal as a little bit larger so we can always see that. There we go. So it is class string and true once again. So now we checked pizza here and it said class string. And then this said true where we checked the type if it was equal to string. And then this said true where we checked if pizza was an instance of string. So now we know two different ways to assign string data to variables, and we can do this with other data as well. So we have literal assignment and constructor functions that can assign data. Now I'm going to comment this out as well. Again, highlighting this and pressing Control and the slash will comment these out. Now when you find these in the course resources, you can do the same thing to uncomment. So you could highlight the lines you want to uncomment and press Control and the slash, and they'll once again be uncommented. So you can toggle between the two by doing that. Now let's discuss concatenation, and that means adding two strings together to form a larger string, and that's what we will do. So we will type concatenation here, and after this, let me define full name as a variable. And I'll use my values from above. So I'm going to set full name equal to first, and then I can use the plus operator. And then I'm going to put an empty string here with one empty space, and then plus again, and type last. And this concatenated my first name with a space in between to my last name. So now we could print full name, there we go, and save. Once again, press the play button, and you can see my full name here inside of the terminal. Now we can also add something to the end of full name if we want to. So I will say full name, and now I can use plus equals, and this is going to take the value of full name and add to it. And I'll just put an exclamation mark here at the end. Then once again, print full name. And if I run the code with the play button, we should see my name now with an exclamation mark here in the terminal. You can also take a number and change it to a string, and this is called casting. So here I'll say casting a number to a string. And let me assign a variable named decade with the value, and I'll use the string constructor here, and I'm going to pass in 1980. So I had a number, 1980, the value, and I am now casting it to a string with the string constructor. After this, we'll go ahead and check this value. So I'll say print and type and decade. And then after that, let's go ahead and just print this out to see what it looks like after it has been casted as well. And now let's check those values. And you can see that yes, that type is a string, and there's the value, but it's a string here. It is not a number, and that is 1980. And now this is important. If I wanted to concatenate that value inside of a sentence, I would need to cast that number to a string as we previously have here. So now let me create a statement. So this is a variable name statement, and I'll just say, I like rock music from the, now I'm going to concatenate that value. So the plus operator, and then I'll just pass in that variable decade, another plus operator, and then the letter S and a period at the end. So now let's print our statement and save with Control S and run our code. And we can see we have the statement, I like rock music from the 1980s. But what if we wanted a statement with multiple lines? We can do that as well. So I'll scroll up for some more room. And underneath this, I will just leave another comment that says multiple lines. And now we'll take a multi-line. I'll just call this multi-line for the variable. And we want to start with 3 quotation marks. Either double or single will work. So I'll put 3 quotation marks. And notice VS Code wants to help me, so it already automatically added the closing 3. After this, I'm going to press return and leave a few lines between the opening and closing quotation marks. Again, 3 at the beginning and 3 at the end. Here I'll say, hey, how are you? With a question mark. And now let's add some spaces with the space bar, press return again, and then another statement. I was just checking in, and then another space or 2 or 3, and then return once again. And now I'll tab over 5 or 6 times and say, all good, question mark, and then notice we have a blank line after as well. Let's save that with Control S. And now after we do that, let's look at our statement in the output when we print multi-line. Save once again and run. Now we have this big statement that is on multiple lines, and of course it has white space before and after some of the things as well. We'll come back to that white space in just a little bit. Now let's talk about escaping special characters also, because sometimes we have special characters inside of our code. We just started this multi-line statement with single quotes, and what if we were to use single quotes around a sentence we created? So here I'll leave a comment, escaping special characters. And now I'm going to create a sentence variable, and I'm going to set this equal to a value that is inside of single quotes. There we go, single quotation marks, and the word I'm. So this would have a single quote in the word. And notice VS Code doesn't like this. We need to escape this single quote if we want it to be in our statement, because right now VS Code just thinks the value ends right here with the letter I. It would not include the letter M. So let's put a slash here, and it's a backward slash, and that escapes that single quote. So now it knows that it should be part of this phrase. So now we can use I'm in our sentence. And I'll say back at work, exclamation mark, and then I want a tab after back at work instead of a space. We can indicate that with another backward slash and a lowercase t. Notice how VS Code leaves this as red, so that's a special character. So now we have a tab in our sentence. And I'll just put the word hey with an exclamation mark again. And now another backward slash and a lowercase n. That indicates a new line. That is the new line character. So that will make everything else that follows it be on another line. Let's put 2 of those just so we can see what really happens there. Then I'm going to use the word where's. So it once again has a single quote that I need to escape. And then the letter S, then this. Then I want at slash located. And I want to put a slash between at and located. But as we know already, we're using slashes here for special characters. So we also need to be able to escape that slash. And so we do that by adding a second slash, but only one will appear in our sentence. And then I'll put a question mark at the end. And let's go ahead and print this sentence out and see what we get. Control S to save, and we run our code. And here we have our full sentence. I'm back at work. Hey, where's this at located? Once again, it put in the tab, it put in the line breaks, and we were able to use the single quotes even though we had wrapped our full sentence inside of single quotes. I'm going to scroll up for some more room, and then I'm going to leave another comment because we're going to begin working with string methods. Now, methods are functions that are called on the string class, and that's not too important right now. But we do want to see what these methods will do for us. So let's start out just by looking at the value that we once again have in the variable first. But after that, I'm going to put another print line and say first dot lower, and we'll see what it does to the value that is in the first variable. And we'll also note that it won't actually change the value in the first variable. It will just return another value. And then instead of typing that all again, I'm going to use Shift Alt and the down arrow and do that twice. And I'm going to change lower in this second one to upper. See what happens there. And then I'm just going to remove lower from this last one so we can once again see the value of first and note that it did not change. Control S to save and click the play button. And now here's our value of first, which is my first name, Dave. And then after we called the lower method that we see here on line 49, we then had the lowercase value of my name, and then first.upper, and we had the all uppercase value of my name. And then we once again just checked the value that was in the first variable, and it is still left untouched as it was. Let's look at some more string methods, and instead of using my first name here in the first variable, let's use that multi-line variable that we created. So we'll now say print, and then inside of this print, I'm going to use multi-line, and I'm going to use the title method at the end of this. Now, this method will turn everything to proper case, and capitalizing the first letter of every word in that multi-line phrase. But I'm also going to print another version of multi-line, so we should see it twice. And in this version, I'm going to use the replace method. I'm going to replace the word good with the word okay. And we should see the difference there. And then finally, I'm just going to print multi-line so we can see that the original value did not change. So I will save that, click play, and of course we can't see all of that at once. I'm going to make this terminal window take up the full screen for a moment. We'll see 3 versions of this. So here was the version that has the proper case where we called the title method. So it says, hey, how are you? I was just checking in, all good. The second version used the replace method and we changed good to okay. And then finally, we printed the original version that you can see did not use proper case with the title method and still contains the word good. Now I'll go ahead and close out this terminal window for a moment, and we talked about all of that white space that is in our multi-line variable. So let's work with that now. I'm going to call print once again, and I'm going to call the length function, which is just len, and I'm going to pass multi-line into this so we can see what the original length of our multi-line string is. So it will count every character. After that, we're going to change the multi-line variable, and I'm going to use the plus equals to add to the end of it. And let's just add a lot of extra white space. After that, let's go ahead and once again change the multi-line variable, and I'm going to add some space to the beginning of it. And we'll do that in a different way. Instead of the plus equals, I'll use the equal symbol. I'll add some space, and then at the end, I'll concatenate the value that we have in multi-line currently. And then after that, let's once again check the length. So we'll check the length function with len, and then we'll pass in multi-line. So we're checking the original length, we're adding to the end and the beginning, and then we're checking that length again. And if you want to, you could even check in between where you'd get a value that only has it added to the end and not at the beginning. So now let's run this and see the values that we get. So we start out with 126, and after we add all of that extra white space at the beginning and at the end of the variable, it's 184 characters. Now, of course, this white space is undesirable, but I'm adding it as an example. So now let's look at some string methods that will remove that white space if you had some values that you needed to remove white space from. So I'll say print once again, and now we'll say multi-line dot strip. And that should remove the white space if we wanted to remove it. But this will, of course, print out the output. It's not checking the length if we don't add length, and we won't really be able to see that because you can't see white space. So let's go ahead and just check the length here, len, and we need to wrap that in parentheses. And now I'm going to do something else. I'll do Shift Alt and the down arrow twice. And there are 2 other methods we can check. So let's check if we only remove the white space from the left side, and that is with lstrip. Let's also check if we only remove the white space from the right side, and that is rstrip. So if we check all 3 of those, then we'll see different values. So let's run this code with the play button, and we can see the last 3 here. If we removed, well, all of the white space, it took it down to 123. And remember our original, it had 126 up here before we added the white space. So this actually removed some extra unneeded characters as well. And then when we only removed the white space from the left side, we still had 165 characters. When we only removed it from the right side, then we had 142. And I think I'm saying that in the correct order. Yes, we removed the right side last. And there are many more string methods, and I'm going to leave a link in the course resources where you could go to the documentation and find all of the available string methods that you can experiment with. Right now, let's just use a few more string methods to build something, just so we can apply this in a small way for now. Let's build a menu. I'm going to set a title variable equal to menu. Notice it's all lowercase value, and we can call string methods directly on the value itself. It doesn't have to be called on a variable name as I have been showing you. So here I'm going to say menu.upperCase upper and call a string method directly there, and that will be stored in the title variable. After that, I'm going to print the title, and I'm going to call the center method. I'll pass in 20 characters, and I'm going to pass in a value that is an equal sign. Let's see what this does if we just return this much. And I'm also going to leave an empty line here so we do not actually see everything that we've had above pressed right up against our menu. So Control S to save, and now I'll run the code with the play button, and you can see what we've got. So we called a center method, and it centered our word menu that was set to all uppercase, and it used that character I passed into the center method to fill out the rest of the space. So that's a very interesting method to call. Now let's call another one that is equally interesting. So after this, I'll say print, and I'm going to use the string coffee. And after this, I'm going to use ljust, which means left justify. And I'm going to give this 16 characters. I'm going to have it fill out the remaining space after coffee with periods. And then I'm going to concatenate inside of our print statement. And I'm going to say $1, but I want it to be a string. So the $ and the number 1. And I'm going to call the right justify method on it. And I'm going to say 4 characters. There is nothing that I want to fill out the rest of the space with, so I'm just going to pass in one argument here, or one value, I should say, to this right justify method. So after I do that and save, let's see what we get in our terminal once again when we click run. And now our menu has coffee, and you can see it filled out the space that we gave it for 16 characters. And then we have our dollar that is right justified over here. Let's go ahead and complete our menu. I'm going to scroll up, and once again, as I've explained, I'm going to use Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy this down twice. And now let's just change our values. So I'll double click coffee and change it to muffin. And in the last line, I'll change it to cheesecake. And then here, let's just change our values to $2, and let's go with $4. Control S to save, and we run our code, and we have a nice little coffee house menu. Let's close the terminal, and let's look at just a few more things with strings. And one thing to discuss is string index values. So I'm going to say string index values here in a comment, and just to keep our menu separate, I'll once again print an empty string here. Okay, after the string index values comment, let's look at string index values. I'll come back to that first variable that we have. And if we just want the value that is at index 1, do you think that will be the D in my name? It would seem to be if we say we want the number 1 value, right? The very first value. Well, that might not be what that indicates. Let's go ahead and press play. And you can see it actually returns the second letter. And that's because indexes start at 0. So if we wanted the first letter, we would pass in a 0 right here. Let's copy this down with Shift Alt and the down arrow. And let's see what -1 gives us. So if we save now and run our code, we have the E, which is the last letter in my first name. So anytime we want the last value in the string, we can reference the -1 index. And that could be very useful if you didn't know how many letters were in the string you were working with, but you needed to get that last value. You can also use a range of values. So here, instead of just 1 or -1, you can start with the index, say at the first position. Well, it's actually the second position, but at the 1 position. And then we could say we want to end at the last position, but this might not deliver what you think either. When you provide a range, let's go ahead and run this, you see we just get the AV. So the value you give at the end of the range will not be part of the output. So you need to consider that when you create the range. And if you want to go all the way to the end, you just provide a range without providing the last value at all, like this. And now we should get the A through the end of my first name. Run this, yes, we get AVE when we don't provide that final value. And now when we've previously checked what data type we had, some of those checks were returning true, and that is Boolean data. Let's look at a couple of methods that also return Boolean data. And I'll just say some methods return Boolean data. And if you're wondering what Boolean means, it just means we're working with true or false data. So if we print here and say first starts with, now I could say, does the value in the first variable, does it start with the string D? Well, that should be true because my name starts with a capital D. Let's copy this down so we can check two things at once. Now we can say does first ends with, and now we'll check the letter Z. So let's see what result we get. Oh, it does not have two S's. And notice Visual Studio Code will help you with that. How this, in my theme at least, it turned purple here. And if you're not using the same theme, it may turn a different color. But overall, if I mistype something, then it doesn't look right. It doesn't have that color that starts with does. But if I remove the S, there you can see it identifies the method. Likewise, and I'll just remove this for a second, when we're working here in Visual Studio Code, you can just type the period and suddenly a list of all of these different methods can show up, including the one I want, which is ends with, and you can search for them that way as well. So now I'll just put in the letter Z again, save, and we'll run the code. And of course, we get true that yes, first starts with the letter D, a capital D, but false, it does not end with the letter Z. So now since we've brought up Boolean data, let's quickly discuss that. And I'll just leave another comment here that says Boolean data type. And now after this, I'm going to set my value equal to true. Now notice the true has a capital T. If I remove that and just put true, Visual Studio Code tells us something is wrong here. It needs to be proper case with a capital T, or false will not work either. It needs to be capital F for false. So either way you do it, just needs to be proper case, whether you choose true or false. Now after this, I'll set another variable, just the letter X. I'll set it equal to bool, and I'll pass in false. Now this is the constructor function once again. So you can set this data type in either way. And once again, we can print, say type, and check the type of X. And we could also say print and say is instance that we see right there. And then we could pass in my value and say, is it a bool value? We should get true for both of those. Let's go ahead and run the code. And well, we didn't get true. It just said what type it was. Actually, we didn't check that against a value like bool. So yes, we get the output here, what it is. Then yes, true for the second one. But just important to remember that Boolean means you are working with true or false data. Let's move on to the numeric data types, and there is definitely more than one. So we'll start here, and I'll just say numeric data types. And the first type we'll work with is integer, and we have seen this in previous lessons. I'm going to set price equal to 100. Then I'll set best price, and I'm going to set this equal to the constructor function and pass in 80. So you can set an integer in either way. And just like we did in the past, as a matter of fact, I could just copy these lines, Control C, and then down here, Control V to paste. I could change X to price, and we should see that it returns the type integer. And then here, I could change this to best price, and we'll compare it not to bool, but to an integer type. And we'll see what we get for the output. And yes, it is a type integer, and yes, it's true that it is an instance of integer. After that, let's do some more with numbers, and we'll look at the float type. Float types have decimals, so a grade point average, GPA, set that equal to 3.28. That would be a float type, and that is a literal assignment, just like we did with price up here. But we could also use a constructor, but it almost seems pointless because you still type the float. So I'll just say y equals float 1.14. And of course, this is a float data as well. We just had to type a little bit more. So here we could say print, we'll check the type GPA, and it should return float. And of course, we could do is instance as well if we wanted to. But let's see what we get. Yes, it is the type float. Now there is one more numeric type to quickly mention. It is not a type we will use in these basic lessons, but I should bring it up. It's the complex type, and it's often used in electrical engineering. It uses a J notation. So here we'd say comp value equals 5 plus 3J. I know that looks a little strange, especially if you're not into engineering. But we can print type, and we'll check the type for our comp value. But now a complex value has a couple of property values we can check. So let's go ahead and do that just so you see how. We can say comp value dot real. We can also say comp underscore value dot imag, which stands for imaginary. This is based on a real number system, and it has a real number value and an imaginary number value. Once again, if you're not into engineering, it may not make a whole lot of sense, but Python has so many applications, it's pretty awesome that this is built in. So let's go ahead and run this, see what we get back. Yes, it's a complex type, and you can see when we return those individual property values, they are float values, but they are part of the complex data type. Okay, I'm not going to go over all the different mathematical operations that you can do. We have previously covered several of those in the past lessons, so no need to rehash that. We went over those especially with operators in the last lesson. But there are some built-in functions for numbers. So let me just highlight those with a comment this way, built-in functions for numbers. And let's print one of those out. Let's print the absolute value of the GPA that we previously created. And remember, that was a float type. I think we said 3.28. So let's see what the absolute value of that GPA value would be. It is 3.28. So no change there. But once again, this is checking the absolute value. Now let's see if we did something else with that we could check. We could say print, and we could say round, pass in the GPA there. And then let's go ahead and do one other. Let's print round and say GPA, and we can specify the decimal. So the difference here would be this would round to the nearest integer. This would round to the nearest decimal place that we specify. So we have 2 decimal points here with our absolute value. And you know what? I should check this as well by saying print. And since that didn't change before, we could say GPA multiplied by -1. So you would expect to have a negative 3.28, but the absolute value will probably not be negative. So now we can check all of this. Let's run. And yes, we got 3.28 twice without the negative, although that would have been expected. Now the rounded down to the nearest integer, which was 3. But then when we specified the decimal point, it rounded up from 3.28 to 3.3. So those are just a couple of built-in functions that you can use with numbers without importing a module. But there are some modules that provide many good mathematic helpers. And one of those is simply the math module. Now, if I type import math right here, and when I save the file, it's going to move this to the top of the file, which is nice. And that's because I have that Python extension installed that we'd previously talked about. Visual Studio Code just wants to help us format this. What you should typically do is type your imports if you're bringing in a module, which we'll get into more further in this series. But you would type your imports at the top of the file. I'm going to type it here to just give the example of how it will be moved to the top. Now, after that, I want to use this math module just to get the value of pi. So I'm going to say math.pi. And once again, we can use dot notation to check all of the different things available in this module for us. I just want pi right there. Okay, when I Control S to save, notice that import statement was moved. It should be at the top, and it is. So VS Code moved it right up here to the top above our first actual code. If I was typing this at the top, where I would normally put it is at the absolute top of the file. Okay, after that, let's scroll back down to where we were, and we should just run our code once we're back here to check the value of pi. So we'll do that, and there is pi from the math module. Let's do a few more things with the math module because we've imported it, so let's use it. I'll Shift Alt and the down arrow 3 more times, And let's go ahead and use the square root function that we can use. Let's pass in like 64 and see what the square root of that is. Let's also use the ceil function. And here let's pass in our GPA and see what ceil does. And then let's use, I want to go ahead and highlight that. Let's use floor and pass in GPA as well. So we're going to see pi once again, then we'll see the square root of 64, then the ceiling of our GPA value and the floor of our GPA value. So Control S to save, run the code. So after pi, then we went ahead and found out the square root of 64 is 8, and that is a float value that was returned. But then when we checked the ceiling value of our GPA, which was 3.28, it's now 4, so that rounded up to the nearest integer. Likewise, math floor rounded down to the nearest integer. And one more note, earlier we cast a number to a string, but we could also, let's say here, casting a string to a number. We could also cast a string to a number. So for example, if I had zip code, which is my variable, and inside of it I had this zip code, which is a string, I could check that value or turn that string into a numeric value using the integer constructor function, pass in zip code, then I'll check the type of the zip value. So now that I have that, Control S and run the code, and yes, it is an integer after we have cast that string to an integer with the constructor. Now, a quick note, you can, and I'll scroll just for some more room again, you can have an error if you attempt to cast incorrect data. So for example, if I said zip underscore value equals, and I said integer, and then I passed in New York, which I believe this is a zip code for New York, but we pass in the actual words New York to our integer constructor. Python isn't going to like this, so let's take a quick look at the error. You can see it says invalid literal, and it doesn't like what we did. It really highlights it there. So let's close out of that. I'll comment this out, but I'm going to leave it in the code for you in the course resources, just so you can see this reference that this will be an error. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.